When I was a really little kid, my favorite game genre was definitely action games, like side-scrolling action games, like Sonic and Mario, that sort of thing. I couldn't get enough. Then, when I was a tween and younger teen, my favorite game genre was RPGs, classic 90s RPGs. Final Fantasy, Chrono Cross, Chrono Trigger, all those awesome single player RPGs for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and the PS1. I couldn't get enough of those games. Then I got a little older. When I was a young teen and when I was in my early 20s, that age range where I was in college, I loved, absolutely loved massive multiplayer online RPGs. I couldn't get enough. I played a ton of them. Of course, the one that I really stuck to was World of Warcraft, and I put about 1 trillion hours into World of Warcraft. Seriously, I put about 78 years of gameplay into World of Warcraft in the span of just like 3 years. It was amazing. I was playing World of Warcraft 100 hours a day. I don't know how I did it. I had some kind of time portal in my room where time just slowed down just for me. But after college, I continued to play games. I just couldn't pick a genre that I really loved. Not that I didn't love games, it's just that I couldn't pick a specific game genre that was my favorite. Like, hands down my favorite. Somebody asked me, what's my favorite game genre? And in my mid to late 20s, I just couldn't tell you. It's racing. It's sports games. It's fighting. Like, I couldn't pick one. Until a couple of years ago, when I realized what it was. I narrowed it down to the games that I spend the most time in, the games that I have the most fun in, and the games that I enjoy the most. And these are over-the-top action RPGs, like Diablo 3 clones. I cannot seriously get enough of over-the-top action RPGs. If they're good, I can't put it down until I'm finished. There's definitely bad ones that I just don't waste my time in. Some that, like, the controls aren't that good, the character is a little stiff, moves too slow, there's problems with the gameplay. I don't waste my time with every single over-the-top action RPG, but when one is good or really great, I'm hooked. And I am really happy to say that Vikings, Wolves of Midgard, is one of those Diablo clone over-the-top action RPGs that are really, really good. I mean, I got absolutely addicted. And it's weird because every time I play an over-the-top action RPG like this, it's always the same thing. I always pick a ranged class. I think classes that I fighting in melee range, they're for suckers. Like warriors, berserkers, whatever. Anytime you have to come up close to an enemy in an over-the-top action RPG, I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice. Mostly because there's just so many enemies. In every single level, you're taking on literally an army. So a lot of the time, you're just going to be surrounded, getting hit from all sides. Unless you have some kind of special move that siphons life from the enemy every time you hit the enemy, and not every single class has that. It's just not worth it. For me, it's always worth it to be a ranger or a mage, shooting from far away. By the time the enemy reaches me in over-the-top action RPGs, they just fall at my feet. Really powerful enemies that take a lot of hits, well, I just roll out of the way. I evade, continue shooting them, jump out of the way again, continue shooting them, until once again they fall at my feet. I've gotten really good at over-the-top action RPGs. I mean, I just picked up Vikings, Wolves of Midgard, and I was already a master after playing the game for about 20 minutes. Completely mastered the game controls. It's a really hardy game. There's a lot of gameplay. It's all pretty much identical gameplay. I mean, it follows the same exact formula in every level. You run through a level, you kill a bunch of enemies, like an entire army of enemies, and towards the end of the level, exactly at the end of the level, there's a boss fight. And even the boss fights are pretty much the same strategy. I mean, all the bosses look different, just like the enemies. They look different. All the bosses have different attacks. Again, just like the enemies. There's a lot of variety in the enemy attacks, but you're pretty much doing the same thing. You wait for the enemy to attack, you evade or run out of the way, you shoot them a little bit, rinse, repeat, over and over and over. And of course, you have different moves, different special moves as a ranger, as any class. But it's pretty much all the same thing. Either you do a volley shot, you do some kind of AoE attack, or you're just using the regular bare bones arrow attack. It doesn't matter. You wait for the enemy attack, evade the attack, make sure you don't get hit the enemy, evade the enemy's attack again, repeat over and over and over. It's very basic in terms of that, but I wouldn't say this game is basic just because, as I've said, there are a lot of different types of attacks, and then you can also pick up various trinkets that give you special attacks, like summoning a boar to fight alongside of you. While the gameplay in Vikings Wolves of Midgard does get repetitive, there's a lot of gameplay. There's like too many levels. At a certain point I thought, okay, this has to be the last fight. This has to be the last level, the last boss. And it just kept going and going and going. And on top of that, there's a lot of side quests. A lot of things you can do in the game that have nothing to do with the main story. Things that you don't have to do, but if you do them, it's going to be even more gameplay. Overall, I think I passed the game with barely doing any side quests within like 12 to 14 hours, which is pretty good considering most games today are under 10 hours. The game has some unique features that are absent from a lot of other over-the-top action RPGs. One is it's very story-driven. You're following a story, you're not just like a nameless adventurer, and you're part of the story. You're like the main guy in the story. Also, it has a lot of management aspects. Like, you play as the chieftain of a village, and you have to upgrade your village. Just like, you know, you upgrade your character by leveling up, by learning new abilities, by buying and upgrading weapons, doing all that. You do the same thing to your village. Like, you upgrade your shrines, you upgrade your port, you pass various levels, and you recruit new people to be in your village. Like a trader who can pretty much buy all your equipment, so you don't have to run to a bunch of different traders in your village to sell things. You can just sell them to one guy. I like the village management aspect of this game. It's something very rare for an over-the-top action RPG, but outside of that, it's very standard in terms of action RPGs. Pretty much everything else is a Diablo clone. Even the graphics, the movement, the attacks, the classes, all the equipment you find as you quest, all of that is pretty much Diablo 3, just not named Diablo 3. I really love the mythos of this game. The whole Viking mythos. It's really cool that you play as a Viking because there's a reason for you to run into towns and kill a bunch of people. That's what Vikings did. They raided towns and villages. It mixes like what Vikings actually did in reality with Viking lore, like all those Viking gods and all the Viking demons that are talked about in fables. It's a nice mix of reality and fantasy. The game itself feels a lot like a mixture of the TV show Vikings and the movie Beowulf, or just any kind of Viking fable you can think of. They include a lot of them. In fact, a lot of the game's plots are straight up taken out of the plots of like the Vikings TV show and various Viking fables. In fact, the main character kind of looks like Ragnar Lothbrok, and there's also a couple of characters in the game that look like other characters from that show, and I think that's fantastic. I mean, Vikings is like one of my favorite new shows of all time. Probably the favorite new show of all time. A lot of people are like, dude, Breaking Bad is amazing. Bro, Sons of Anarchy. Vikings blows those two shows out of the water, hands down for me. There are a few problems with the game. Technical problems mostly. They're very few and far in between, so it's not even worth mentioning, but I will. Sometimes there's like a little glitch where you're not shooting the enemy you're pointing at, like you're shooting through the enemy, which is weird, but this happens literally like 0.5% of the time, so it's like, who cares? And once in a while, this actually happens quite a lot, you will start shooting enemies that are not yet on the screen. Like their life bar pops up, but you can't see the enemy on the screen yet. Which doesn't make sense to me, because I'm playing this game on a big screen TV, so pretty much everything that's in the gameplay should show up on my TV. I don't get that. But other than these two, pretty much everything else in this game is fantastic. If you are a fan of Diablo 3 or Diablo 3 type games, this is definitely not a game to miss. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more game reviews. Goodbye, my friends.